A good topic. So, we're going to talk about what's appropriate and what's inappropriate for American small talk. Honestly, if it's Friday or Monday, the first question you're going to ask is about the weekend. So, there's a little bit of a schedule you can follow so that you don't feel overwhelmed. So, if it's Friday, you can always ask, "Oh, do you have any plans this weekend?" If it's Monday, you can ask, "How was your weekend?" If it's the middle of the week, you can say, "How's your week going so far? How was your week?" Maybe if it's Thursday, after you ask about the weekend on Friday, "Oh, and how was your week this week?" Grammatically, pretty basic. And in terms of the schedule, pretty simple. Now, the thing you want to accept here, and I was just talking to a client, he works at AWS, and we're talking about how difficult it was for him to, from Brazil, when he moved to the US, to get used to the fact that Americans say everything is good or great. And I get it. It can seem disingenuous. It can seem like, no, your life can't be great all the time. That's not what we mean. It's just a simple way to get through small talk. Once you're closer with someone, once you have a trusted friendship or work relationship, then they can open up and say, "Actually, I'm not feeling so great." But we don't do that at the beginning. So if you're coming from a culture that's very open, I want you to resist oversharing personal things at the beginning. And it's not because we're not lying when we say things are great. It's just how we answer everything. "How's your day?" "Great, good, good." And then we walk off. And that can be annoying. But once you realize we don't take it personally, it's just the rhythm that we have, you're able to accept it. And from a non native speaker perspective, this is less pressure for you. You don't have to create all these complicated responses when someone says, "How's your day?" "Good, thanks. How's yours?" Simple. But you want to do it in a way that's genuine. So the thing is, if you tend to, in your culture, really be open about how you are. If someone says, "How's your day going?" And you're like, "Oh, it's terrible. I mean, my back's been hurting and my mom did that." Da, da, da." That might be appropriate for your culture, but it doesn't translate well. If you do that in English, the problem is you will be perceived as an oversharer or a complainer. And what that does is it doesn't establish trust. Someone who overshares immediately usually will kind of a red flag, like, oh, if they talk this much, maybe they're talking about me behind my back or something. It's just uncomfortable. And you might think you're being honest, but from American culture perspective, you might be perceived as a complainer. And you don't want to start off a meeting with that kind of negative energy. So, how was your day? Good, thanks. If you want to add a little bit of what you consider to be honest, keep it simple. "Oh, it's really busy, but good. Thanks. How about you? How's your week going?" So you can add a little bit, but notice it's very, very concise. Now, the other thing Americans love to talk about is the weather. Now, the interesting part here, because the US is so big, when you have virtual meetings or meetings with people from different cities, this could be interesting. Like it's at the same time of year, it's super hot in the south and super cold in the north, whatever. Even if you're not super excited to talk about the weather, again, think about it as, look, Americans, we're so formulaic and we're like little corporate robots that smile a lot. So there are certain things that just think about it as making people comfortable. You get this kind of basic standardized small talk to start things to warm up, and then you can get into the things that are really important. And it's really ineffective if you're about to go and pitch a multi-million dollar deal or merger or whatever the meeting is about, and you skip the small talk. You're not going to establish the trust and the energy that you need to close the deal or to have a more effective business conversation. Just like when you're doing business with other cultures, if they're the one that you need to connect with, you need to learn how they communicate. But now that you're working, especially in the globalization that we're experiencing, the standard does default to American culture a lot. So it'll really give you a good competitive edge and help you reach the goals that you have. Industry news and current events, I would recommend stick to the positive. Don't talk about negative industry news because remember, we're not talking about deep conversations with coworkers or colleagues or peers. We're talking about small talk. And you want to establish It's not about being happy all the time, but if you're always talking about negative things, you're going to be perceived as a negative person. So it's not that you have to be super smiley and happy joy all the time, but there is an expectation of neutrality or positivity that will help you do small talk that creates a more productive foundation for conversation. And interests. Now, this one, for the interests, I recommend share and don't just ask. So with American conversation, I find that you kind of set the standard for what you want the answer to be. So if you share, then you show them what you're expecting in return. And so what I mean by this, and it sounds more complicated than it is, but again, you understanding the strategy will help you be more effective. Instead of just saying, "What do you like to watch? What movies do you like?" That's okay, but that also feels like either super basic English wise or robotic and unfriendly conversation wise. Instead, I want you to share about yourself and then ask. For example, if you're talking about the weekend, you could say, "Oh, I spent all Sunday watching Top Chef. I love reality shows. What about you? Do you watch any reality competition shows?" So then you've shared of yourself concisely and then you've asked them. So what this does is if they like the same thing that you're talking about, your interest, that's going to be awesome because then you know that about them and then you're able to refer back to that in other conversations. If they don't, it's okay. You didn't spend 5 minutes talking about reality competition shows. It was concise. So if you're like, no, I don't really watch reality shows. Okay, then you can move the conversation forward. Oh, okay. What do you like to watch? And then they might share something that maybe the shows they do watch you also enjoy, maybe not. So if you don't, then you can, again, this is where you practice and say, oh, okay, I have never watched that one. I'll have to check it out. Don't ask so many follow-up questions like, what's that show about? Tell me all about it. Because this is for business small talk. We're usually talking about a few minutes before a meeting starts. You don't want to start an in-depth conversation about an unrelated topic and then you have to cut it off abruptly and start the meeting. So it's also about making sure the amount of things you talk about are concise, easy to cut off, and easy to move on, but they're still very insightful. And something here I recommend when someone talks about interests, and I do this personally, and it's what I coach, write it down. Don't do it in the moment because then that's awkward of like, let me write down what you just said, but kind of try to store it away or subtly, if you're typing notes or something during the meeting, type it up. So if Jane mentions that she really likes the podcast Diary of a CEO, write it down because then what you can do is check it out later. Maybe go Google it, go listen to an episode, and then imagine that connection. And you're then, let's say that you're the CEO and that person is the director of one of the departments. You're walking around the company with them the following day, the next week, and you say, "Hey, you know what? I checked out that podcast that you talked about, and I really enjoyed the episode with when he interviewed whoever." From a leadership perspective, can you imagine if someone you're like, "Wow, not only did she listen to what I was saying, she looked into something that was important to me." You don't have to listen to the whole episode, but just the effort, the connection that that makes as a leader, you're increasing trust. You're increasing connection that when things get tough, all the positive small connections that you've made make a big difference. And that's really what I try to help you as a leader who's a non-native speaker. It's not just about, I don't feel like talking about the weather. I don't really get what Americans are talking about. Like they all say the same thing before every meeting. Yes, we do. But that makes it easier for you to understand it. And then with the right strategy and coaching, you elevate it. The kinds of connections you can make when you take those notes and follow up. If someone mentions that their kid plays baseball, you can ask about that. Like, oh, I remember you mentioned your son plays baseball. Did he have any games this week? You're like, wow, that this person really listened. So you don't have to remember everything. I take notes. I write down when people say they're interested in things, and then if I have time, I'll go find something to share. And if not, at least I remember it, and then I can bring it up again later. So these are genuine connections. It's worth the effort. Just because it's basic doesn't mean it's simple or easy.